Hi, I'm Bill Houghton, the founder of Sensible Surrogacy, and today we're talking about your surrogate mother, who she is, where to find her, and how to pay her. So what is your surrogate mother? Who is she? Well, in short, she is the woman who is going to carry the pregnancy for you for 9 months and then take care of your baby and then hand your baby off to you at the end. More importantly is sort of what your surrogate is not. Your surrogate is not a servant. Right? Although you have an agreement with her, she is not an employee. She and you are going to be partners in a journey that's going to take well over a year and is going to basically expand your family. And the terms of that agreement are a two-way street. She is going to take care of your child for you, and your promise to her is that you are going to take care of her. And when you start matching your surrogate, it's important to keep in mind that this is a partnership and she needs to work with you just as much as you need to work with her. So keep that in mind as you start thinking about your surrogate and start thinking about how you're going to work with her over the next full year while you conceive your new family. So, how do you find your surrogate? Well, the easiest way to find a surrogate is to hire an agency, right? Part of an agency's program, what their package is that they are going to find you a surrogate. And they typically have a professional on staff whose job it is nothing but to go out and find surrogates. Now, finding a surrogate through an agency is no small task. It costs a lot of money. And there has actually been a small industry that has popped up around finding surrogates. The surrogate agency that you work with isn't actually going out and knocking on doors typically themselves. They get their profiles from a broker. Right? And that broker gets surrogate profiles from a recruiter, and the recruiter probably gets profiles from somebody else. And every time the profile changes hand from the person who sort of knocks on the door and talks to the surrogate candidate herself, and passes the profile on to the broker, on to the recruiter, and then on to the parents. Every time that step happens, money changes hands, which is why it's expensive to find a surrogate through an agency, because those profiles, those women who are, especially if they're very qualified, they come with a cost, right? And you're going to have to pay that cost to your agency. Now, if you don't want to use an agency, if you want to go out and find a surrogate yourself, there are some options, right? And a lot of people do this. It's difficult and lengthy, but the best place to go is probably on Facebook. You want to go to an online community, and the best ones are on Facebook. You go to Facebook and you type in a search for surrogacy groups or parents searching for surrogates or surrogates searching for parents. And there are a number of groups where parents and surrogates potentially swap stories and meet. But if you go that route, don't be disappointed if it takes months or years, because there are far more intended parents than there are surrogates. And the surrogates basically get to choose who they want to work with. So if you are going to an online route and you're thinking about finding a surrogate that way, make sure you have a really good story. Make sure you engage with the community, right? Have a compelling presence in the community, because you want the surrogate to want to help you. Remember, she's not just looking at your profile, she's looking at dozens of others, and you want to make sure that you stand out and really, really compel her to want to help you. The other possibilities are to find a surrogate are however imaginative you can be. I had a colleague who found her surrogate through posting an ad in her local grocery store, right? There are all sorts of places where you can go and post an ad or put some notice up looking for a surrogate, and you may have some luck. But the best place to go is going to be on an online community that has a very wide reach and a number of members who are specifically looking for surrogates or looking for intended parents. There's also the option of hiring a professional recruiter. You don't necessarily have to hire an agency, but there are people who have a history and a career of finding out surrogates, right? Working for agencies. And maybe they're not with an agency now, but they have some experience going out and recruiting surrogates, and they can work freelance for a lot less than what you would pay for an agency, for example. When you start looking for your surrogate, what is it that you're really looking for? What are her qualifications? Well, there are a number of things that you want to make sure that your surrogate sort of has to be qualified, right? What are her criteria? What are her qualifications? She needs to be fertile, which means that she needs to have a child of her own. That's number one. The most important qualification is that she has had one or more healthy pregnancies. The second is that she's going to have to receive full medical clearance, right? And if you're doing this on your own, that means that you're going to have to send her through medical clearance to get her to go to obstetrician, fertility specialist, and get her fully checked out. And there's an array of medical and fertility exams that are going to need to be done. She's also going to have to pass psychiatric evaluation, and almost every IVF clinic that works with surrogates has a requirement that your surrogate has a letter from a qualified therapist who has specialization in surrogacy cases, showing that your surrogate is capable of being a surrogate, capable and aware of what it means to give the baby up at the end, right? And is basically emotionally prepared for that. Finally, there's a legal clearance perspective, right? You want to make sure that your surrogate doesn't have any sort of legal background issues, right? No felony convictions, no sex offender registry, nothing like that. And a simple background check would probably do that, but you definitely want to get that done for your surrogate unless you are doing an agency to do this for you. Now, in addition to those qualifications, there are some important disqualifications. These are things that would absolutely, for most agencies and most clinics, eliminate a woman from contention to being a surrogate. First of all, she has to be within a certain height and weight range, and typically what we would call a BMI, right, a body mass index. And most clinics say if you are over, say, 32 in your BMI, then you are too heavy. And not because heavy people can't get pregnant, but because when you are heavy, you have higher instances of medical complications like gestational diabetes that can cause real problems during a pregnancy. So if you are over a BMI of 31 or 32, that could be an important disqualification. Also, age. If you are over the age of 45, then typically you would be disqualified. Now, most people would think 45 is really high, but no, it actually isn't. And you should note this about age. This is an important point, that if you are not donating the eggs yourself, right? If the woman is just going to carry the baby herself and she's not donating the eggs, then her fertility is based on the health of her uterus, not on her ovaries. And while a woman's ovaries decline precipitously after the age of 30, a woman's uterus basically stays healthy well into her 40s. And the pregnancy rates do not really diminish between a woman who's 35 and 45. Once you get over 45, then you begin to get into issues of medical complications. Like I said, gestational diabetes, ectopic pregnancies, preeclampsia, things like that become problems with women who become pregnant at an older age. It's not that they can't become pregnant, it's just that there are complications that come with that. So the American guidelines, right? The American Society for Reproductive Medicine has issued guidelines as far as the correct age for a surrogate, and they allow all the way up to 40 to 48 years old. But most clinics that I know will allow women up to 45, and there's no reason why you should disqualify a woman just because she is in her early 40s, right? But when you get into the upper 40s, that becomes more of a problem. Unusually, and most people don't understand this, is that there's a disqualification for any woman who is on financial assistance from the government. And there is a general sort of belief in the ethics of surrogacy that it preys on the poor people, the poor women of society. But in the US, it's actually very, very different. The US restrictions are that the poorest of women are not eligible to become surrogates, specifically for that ethical reason, right? You don't want a woman who is doing this, who's going to be your surrogate solely for financial gain. right? You want a woman who is going to be financially independent and is basically incentivized to do this because she cares about the baby and she cares about the intended parents. That's a primary qualification for your surrogate. Now, there's also an additional medical criteria that if you have more than 5 children, right, 5 of your own pregnancies, you're not qualified, or if you've had more than 2 C-sections, that you could be disqualified for medical purposes. And those are basically the qualifications. If you find a woman who meets all those qualifications, then she is a valid surrogate candidate, right? And then you move on to the next steps. The next step is going to be arranging for her compensation and negotiating the agreement with her. Now, how much do you pay your surrogate? Typical base pay for a surrogate in the United States is $35,000. Right? Now that is what we would call the base pay, her general salary for carrying a pregnancy for 9 months. If she is in California or New York, where cost of living is higher and competition for surrogates is extremely intense, then that could go up to $50,000, right? Women who are considering to be surrogates in California ask a lot more money, frankly, because they can get it, because there's a lot of intended parents, especially from overseas, coming to California. It's become a very international hub. But if you're looking for a surrogate and she's in the American Midwest, say she's from Ohio or Pennsylvania, $35,000 is probably the market average of what you should expect. It's sometimes lower, sometimes higher, but 35 is probably the good median. In addition to her base pay, however, that 35, there's also some important benefits that you need to offer to your surrogate. First of all, she needs to, while she's pregnant, get monthly allowances, right? She typically gets anywhere from $250, $300 a month just to cover her costs of becoming pregnant, of being pregnant, right? So, assuming that you're gonna have a year's worth of monthly allowances at $250 a month. Now, every time your surrogate decides or starts a program to become pregnant, she goes through what we would call a stimulation protocol, which is a medical protocol. And that basically consists of hormone injections that are done on a daily basis. Well, every time she starts one of those invasive medical procedures, she's entitled to some compensation. So every time she starts taking medications for an embryo transfer, expect that she's going to charge $1,500 for what we would call a start meds fee. The same when she goes through the embryo transfer itself, right? That's an invasive procedure and expect that she's going to want $1,000, $1,500 for an embryo transfer fee. And that'll be repeated every time she has to go through that. And some surrogacy procedures require 2 or 3 or sometimes even 4 or more embryo transfers, and every time you're going to have to pay an embryo transfer fee and a start meds fee to your surrogate. Right? Now, also in terms of that, she should be entitled to maternity clothes, and this will be included in the contract, but she needs to get a whole new wardrobe for when she's pregnant, so you can expect $750 or so for maternity clothes. And those are what we would call sort of the standard surrogate benefits. Now, in addition to those, you should expect that there are some what we call what-if benefits, right? These are things that may or may not happen, but you've got to include them in your budget as sort of a contingency. What if my surrogate becomes pregnant with twins? Well, in general, a surrogate is entitled to anywhere from $5,000 to $10,000 additional for compensation if she's pregnant with twins, right? Just for the difficulty of a twins pregnancy. What happens if my surrogate has a complication and she has an ectopic pregnancy and she has to have a fallopian tube removed, or she needs a partial hysterectomy, right? Obviously, she's going to be compensated for those, and depending on the severity of that, she could get anywhere from $5,000 to $15,000, depending on the severity of that complication. The most sort of important and sort of looming possibility for additional benefits, I would say, is if your surrogate is required bed rest, right? Now, this is very common, especially in twins pregnancies, for a woman at the end of the pregnancy to be put into bed rest. If she goes into bed rest, if her doctor recommends bed rest, then she can't go to work. So if she is not working, expect that you're going to have to make up her lost wages, which could be, substantial, $1,000 a week, depending on where she works and what her salary is. Also, if she's in bed rest, and she has children, like all surrogates do, expect that she's going to need child care payments, right? She's going to have someone come in and take care of her kids. The same thing is true for housekeeping. All of those are things you're going to have to provide for her as part of her benefits package. And it's quite easy to see that if a woman is put on bed rest, that those costs will escalate, especially if it's a serious complication that will take months, become, potentially thousands and thousands of dollars. So that is a brief summary of you and your surrogate mother, and I hope that was helpful. If you have more questions or you want details on any of what I've just discussed, come to the website sensiblesurrogacy.com and check out the Surrogacy Guide. The guide is a searchable database of articles on every aspect of your surrogacy journey. If you can't find what you're looking for there, send us an email at info@sensiblesurrogacy.com and you can talk to one of our consultants with no cost. And we always have upcoming videos and webinars that we'll be releasing, and I hope to see you in one of those.